Hey, Faith Family, my name's Ben. I'm one of the pastors here, and I want to introduce to you the book of Isaiah for our Bible reading plan. The book of Isaiah was written by the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amoz, and was written in the 8th century BC. We're told in the first verse of the book that he wrote it during the reigns of 4 Judean kings, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. And he wrote it to warn Judah, the people of Judah, of a coming judgment of their sins from God. And what's interesting is he wrote this book some almost 200 years before Judah experienced the judgment from God. He begins writing at the time of the reign of Uzziah, and everything seems to be prospering and going well. And he predicts global events that will happen that will ultimately be used by God to judge the people of Judah. The Assyrian Empire is on the rise. They will conquer Judah's sister nation, Israel. And then another empire will rise up, the Babylonians, and they will conquer the Assyrians, who will then conquer Jerusalem and Judah. And Isaiah makes it very clear that all of this is under the hand of God as God's judgment against his people. The message of Isaiah is one of rebuke, warning, and promise. He rebukes Judah for their sin. He confronts their sin and calls them to repentance and calls them to return back to God. He warns the people of Judah that God will discipline sin and that he will punish sin because he is holy and cannot tolerate sinfulness. But then he also ends the book by promising a time of restoration and a time of hope where the faithful remnant of Judah will be restored to the promised land and will be able to walk in God's promises. There's several key themes in the book of Isaiah to be on the lookout for. The first is God's holiness. Over and over again throughout the book of Isaiah, God is referred to as the Holy One of Israel, that he is seen as high and lifted up and separate from sin, and is not tolerate sinfulness because he is in fact holy. The other theme that you'll see over and over again in this book is humanity's sinfulness. The book focuses on the sins of Judah, but the sins of all the nations are addressed, and it is evident that all of humanity has rebelled against God, has pursued false idols, and pursued things that do not honor the Lord. And so you have these twin themes of God's holiness and man's sinfulness on display throughout the book. Then we also see that God is superior to all other false gods and all other idols. He's often contrasted in the book with idols, and idols are portrayed as foolish and having no power, and God is portrayed as omnipotent and all-wise. But then lastly, the key theme that you'll see in this book is God's promised deliverer. The book of Isaiah contains some of the most well-known prophecies of God's deliverer, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. We are told that Jesus will be born of a virgin. We are told that he will be called Emmanuel, that he will be called the Wonderful Counselor and Mighty God and Prince of Peace. In Isaiah 53, we are told that God's deliverer will redeem humanity through his suffering. We have this picture of the suffering servant. And so ultimately, the book of Isaiah tells the entire story of the Bible, that God is holy, that humanity has rebelled against God, and that God has made a way for us to be restored in fellowship with him. And that way is through his son, Jesus. I hope you enjoy your time in the book of Isaiah.